Hi, and welcome to Live from the Holodeck. I'm your host, Buster the Destroyer. And with me today is my good friend, who I'll let introduce himself because we call him Ron, but other people call him by his actual name.
Yeah, Reinhard. Reinhard Denke.
Please, would you mind telling everybody kind of who you are, what you do?
Yeah, I'm I've been working the last, I want to say 12, 13 years as a screenwriter and also TV writer. And before that, I worked as a sound designer for television commercials, and have owned my own company for, since 1995.
Oh, well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And we work with you now.
You work with me now.
Here at Wicked Apple. But, we've had some interactions before. You know, the reason we brought, I'm going to call you Ron for the podcast.
Yeah, that's fine.
The reason that we brought Ron in for this first episode is because he's awesome and he's here in town this week. And we've always had some really good discussions when it comes to Star Trek. In the past, and this is kind of the first run of this podcast, so things may change down the line, but so the reason we brought Ron in this week is because he's in town, he works with us, and I've always had some really delightful conversations with Ron about the subject of Star Trek. Now, give us, first, let's start with sort of who you are in relation to Star Trek. One of my favorite questions I love to ask people is, when did it start with you? What was your first episode, or what was the first thing you remember involving Star Trek in your life?
I'll tell you, because I'm not old enough to have been around for Star Trek's first run. And remember, I'm talking about the original series.
Yeah,
the
1966.
66 to 69. And they used to have them on repeat in Fort Worth and on Channel 39. And I was always interested in anything that had to do with science fiction or horror. So for me, it was Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and I'm embarrassed to say Lost in Space, because when you're a kid, that Dr. Smith appeals to you. But also Star Trek, which I always I'd see it in reruns, and the first one that really made an impression on me, I would have been about 12. Mm-hmm. So at this point, it had been in rerun cycle for many years, but it was the Doomsday Machine. And that particular episode, Doomsday Machine, it's one of the episodes of the first two seasons. It's totally in space, right? And a lot of them, they beam down to a planet or whatever they're doing, whereas in that one, it's totally in space. And what captured my imagination and continues to about Star Trek is the idea of a robot that came from another galaxy, is what they conjectured, right? Another star system,
right.
Another galaxy. And it lives forever. It cannot be destroyed. And all it does is eat up planets and digest them and fuel itself and go on. It's like a shark that doesn't die, and it cannot be destroyed until they figure it out in the episode. By running a starship down into it and letting the warp drive engines create a huge nuclear explosion which blows out the Doomsday Machine's fire. But
who was it that destroyed it? Was it Commodore Decker?
It was, Decker ran the space shuttle into it.
Right.
And when the space shuttle went in, they noticed a drop in power. And so then Kirk was on board the Constellation, which was stricken and damaged, and he came up with the idea, what if I run this thing right into it, but beam me out right before it goes in, like a suicide mission. And so they send the Constellation in there, and it destroys the Doomsday Machine. But I remember that made such a huge impression on me. This is in the 70s, okay? And in those days, we couldn't record shows. So what I used to do is get my cassette tape recorder, and if I liked something, I'd go grab it, put a fresh cassette in, and record the show, so I could relive it like a radio show, And I did that with that other program that was on during that same period of time called Kolchak the Night Stalker, which is another conversation. But and then I became absolutely fascinated with Star Trek, and I bought a paperback that was The Making of Star Trek, I think is what it was called, and it was about the first 3 years. And then I went down the rabbit hole. And this is, well, Star Wars came out about a year later. No, it was that same year. Star Wars came out. And I remember even then I was sort of, I was balancing the two. Well, which one do I like more? And I came down on the side of Star Trek. And I'll tell you why. Because I found it far more interesting and a much deeper world. The whole idea of a federation that is with Earth people, quite honestly, whereas in Star Wars we don't know. They're people from all over, right? And the other thing in Star Trek that I liked was that the Federation was made up of very friendly planets, and they all had a similar goal. I love the idea that in the future, it's not just going to be scientists that go up there. It's going to be a combined military science expedition, which I think it makes sense to me. Because what if we run into real Klingons? You know, a bunch of scientists from JPL and MIT are not going to be able to battle aliens, hostile aliens, as well as, you know, a military mission.
And it's funny because there's like this, I want to say there's this like constant debate among Trekkies or Trekkers, whatever everybody prefers these days. But there's sort of this debate on, well, you know, Starfleet isn't a military operation. Other people say, well, it is military because it does have the capability to defend itself. You know, I won't get into like DS9 and why the Federation was unprepared for the Dominion War. And I know you're not as familiar with some of the later shows.
I'm not. I wish I knew some more of the later shows. I need to start with Picard and work my way back. Because that's the new one.
As of the recording of this podcast, I believe there's 2 episodes of Picard left. This is Tuesday, March 26th. So yeah, we have the 2 more episodes of season 2 coming up. And Picard, I'll admit, the first season, I kind of, based on the trailers, I could kind of predict a lot of what was going to happen with that first season's plot. The second season is so much better. And also in particular, one of the characters, for those who do watch Picard, unlike Ron at the moment, Girardi. Girardi got so much better in the second season for me. But anyway, I digress here. So we have a sense of where you started with Star Trek and how it kind of grabbed you. What would you say are some of your I mean, you kind of went over it, but what are some of your favorite virtues that have been put forward by Star Trek that it really like clung on to you? I mean, cling on to you. But you know, you kind of touched on that, and I think it would be nice to kind of get some.
Well, yeah, I mean, the best thing about all the characters in Star Trek is of the major ones, the officers that we follow around, is they have a very noble sense of right and wrong. You know, a lot of people said, "Who's your hero growing up?" And I have to admit, I like Kirk, Captain Kirk, James T. Kirk, and he had a very righteous sense of what was right and wrong. He had moral quandaries at times. I think his relations with the opposite sex have not aged well, considering where we are now as a society compared with the late 1960s, because he was a bit of a seducer and a Lothario. However, I do think that he would have done anything for his friends, and he was incredibly righteous. He never stepped down from a confrontation, especially when he knew he was in the right. He was great about deceiving the right kind of people to deceive. And he never, he questioned himself, but in a very human way. You know, his self-reflection, a lot of times, he always came down on the right side. And he admitted to his mistakes.
Which is a rare quality.
Yeah, it's especially now, you know. Most people, they've never made a mistake, and they never go back and go, you know what, I really screwed up there. And Kirk would, he would always admit his mistakes. The other thing is the triumvirate of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy.
I was just about to say, I always feel like that trifecta was all about, you know, it was like almost like a balance between logic and emotion, with McCoy being emotion.
He's very emotional.
Spock being cold and logical, and Kirk being right in the middle, and rightfully why he's the captain between those two senior officers, kind of always at his, you know, on his shoulder, playing devil and
and because I'm in the industry or whatever you call it, you know, as a writer, it's interesting how casting works. And I remember seeing an interview with Leonard Nimoy. I think it was in the documentary that recently came out.
Oh, the one his I think his son made.
Yeah, his son put
about
together.
His life.
Yeah. And there's an interview with him, and he said, if you look at the pilot, now the pilot that was unaired, the one that they shot in
The Cage,
1964,
yeah.
and then later they used elements of it.
Right, and the court-martial one, I think it's called the Menagerie.
Yeah.
I think later they call it the Menagerie, and the original was called the Cage. And yeah, it was like Spock being put on court-martial.
And
I love that episode.
And Spock is smiling.
Yeah,
And
he has a little
Spock
grin.
is he's acting not like a Vulcan. And he said, well, it was because Jeffrey Hunter, who played Pike, was so detached emotionally and so stoic. He said, I had nothing to work with. And he said, whereas with William Shatner, he said he was more of a well-rounded character, so he could be detached and cold and scientific and logical. And it is interesting to think about casting, what a huge difference that made.
It is, and it's funny. It's funny you mention it because Marla and I just started. Marla being my roommate and my best friend and my coworker, which Ron works with as well. We just started. We went through all the Star Trek except the original series, and then we just recently, just a few days ago, just started watching the original series. And we went ahead and watched the original pilot, even though there's a few episodes in the first season that I must skip because I've seen them so many times.
Yeah, I know.
Years and years ago, somebody gave me a box set, or not even a box set, a few, like 2 or 3 DVDs when I was like a teenager of like some from the first season. And it's like, Charlie X,
Yeah,
Miri.
Charlie X.
I hate Charlie X. I hate Charlie X. I hate Charlie X.
See, I like Charlie. I'll tell you why. Charlie X was one of the early ones I saw that really freaked me out. Because at the end, when they pull him away,
Spoiler
and he goes,
alert.
I want to stay.
Because isn't it that he was a human found by some aliens that
Of a superior intelligence, and they gave him all these mental abilities.
because that was the only way they knew how to take care of him, and then they tried to let him live with humans and he just could not. He clearly could not treat women with respect.
He abused his powers. He abused his superpowers. And at the end, when they zap him away, I always thought, where did they take him? Where did he go? It must have been someplace horrible because he wanted to stay with people.
I think it was something about like the lonely. If I remember and I know people are going to be in the comments of this going, it was because of this. I'm sure it was something to do with like maybe there was like a loneliness that came with that existence.
Well, yeah, he was the only human with these aliens, and he shamed them because he behaved so badly when he came to be with other human beings.
Yeah, he acted like a teenage boy with omnipotent powers.
With superpowers, and of course that one girl, he made her have no face, and
that little yeoman,
guy that was laughing in the gym, he disintegrated him.
It was
don't laugh at me.
It was like some of those early episodes were very, very. What's the show? Rod Sterling.
Twilight Zone.
Yeah, the Twilight. Some of them were very Twilight.
Yeah, they're very Twilight Zone-y, especially. And the other one I was thinking of the first season that was just so bizarre. And I thought, God, if they redid that now with the kind of technology you can make movies with, was the one called The Alternative Factor, where it's hard to explain. When suddenly the whole ship and all this weird stuff happens and Spock goes, the universe just winked. In other words, everything just shifted. The entire universe just shifted.
Yeah, like all the laws of physics were suddenly just a few
they were
points
negated
off.
for like a millisecond, and then everything went back. And it was because there was Lazarus. Remember Lazarus?
Yeah,
and then he had the opposite Lazarus.
little ship,
and he had that cheap little spaceship with a bubble top. And
I like that cheap little spaceship with a bubble top.
well, it was like sheep. And of course, I love reading the production notes about that episode because the actor that played Lazarus, his beard keeps changing from shot to shot. First it's heavy, and then it's light. And they shot that over in Vasquez Rocks, the same place they shot Arena. And anyways, and apparently they were running out of time, and I don't know how they did those in 5 days. They shot everyone apparently in 5 days. How you write? Well, the writing was done before, but act, film, edit, put music on, sound effects. I mean, how many episodes per season? Was it 28?
26, I believe.
26 episodes. Yeah. Can you? I mean, now it's like 8 or 10.
Yeah, and they have much easier, compared to back then where you had to physically edit things.
Yeah, it was all on film.
Now it's all digital, and so
I don't know how they did it. I mean, that's the part that gets to me. So what that Lazarus beard is,
It's a little shifty.
is all over the place because considering what they were working with.
Yeah.
But the idea of the two, one universe or the other, suddenly what's the best? Intersecting or trespassing on each other. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
And it makes me really appreciate how Gene Roddenberry, as any great showrunner would, he found the best writers to write these episodes.
Harlan Ellison wrote The City on the Edge of Forever.
Yeah.
And that's and if you don't know about this, the original script to that was much different.
Oh man, I've read it, and I'm a Harlan Ellison fan. And I mean, what he did with that was some of the most inventive writing about time travel, which science fiction and time travel have been around for years. I
They've
mean,
been
it's
buddies
always
for a while.
Yeah, it's H.G. Wells.
They drink beer out on the porch sometimes.
Yeah, they've been
Quite
friends.
often, actually.
They've been acquainted. But what he did with that, the idea that one action could lead to Hitler winning World War II, and they have to let Edith Keeler die.
Yeah, like the butterfly.
Yeah, it's like the Ray Bradbury thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a, God, is that a good episode?
It's a great.
Okay, but season one is, and the other thing about season one when you watch it, what always gets me is how many people are on the Enterprise, because when they're in the corridors of the ship, which are enormous,
there's like
for
so
a
many
spaceship,
people.
there's people everywhere. And I remember one episode, there's people going by in swimsuits and towels. And it makes me wonder that day on Desilu on the lot, they went, "Hey, you guys making a beach bingo movie?
Hey, come over
here and walk through
Just
the
walk
halls.
through the hall.
And Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner are going to walk by you." And the other thing that gets me is the size. Again, I would think a spaceship is probably going to be pretty small on the inside, because you have to have pressure hulls. And
I remember looking this up as a teenager because I'm one of those people, when I get into something, I get into it and I really delve into the ideas and the mechanics, or not necessarily the mechanics, but like the canon of it. I remember when I was a kid. Now it could be different now. Like canon and Star Trek, constantly changing.
It's a much
thing.
bigger. Yeah, it's a much bigger.
But
show.
I believe that I remember as a teenager looking it up, and I believe that the Enterprise was supposed to have had about 400 people on board it.
It was a crew of 400.
Which
that's right.
It's a huge ship too, and I can go on and on. There's all kinds of people when you talk about TNG. That ship was supposed to have 1,000 crew members, but it was so big that like there was no way for it to be full of only 1,000 people with how big it was. But anyway,
well, there's a lot of extra space in those corridors. I'll tell you, there's a really wide corridors. It doesn't seem like an efficient use of space. But when I was a kid, what we used to have, because I went down the rabbit hole of Star Trek, and maybe, like I said, when I was 12 or 13, and I persuaded my dad to buy me this thing in a bookstore. It was a bookstore. Have you ever seen the Star Trek blueprints?
yes,
They used to have this set of blueprints. Okay?
Yes.
And it was all these ships they never made in the show. The Destroyer and the Dreadnought. All this stuff. I mean, now it's a different world. We have the internet, and people actually make models of those things.
And there, shout out to Star Trek Online. I mean, this year in Picard, I believe several of the ships from Star Trek Online, the MMORPG, were made canon in Picard.
Yeah,
and such a big win for the wonderful people over there at STO. Shout out to them. Like
it's much bigger,
and all those guys.
And the thing is, back then fans had nowhere to go, right? So all I could do is make a tape of it, an audio tape, which was realistic tapes, which Tandy made, because everything was Radio Shack in Fort Worth, because Tandy was our big industry back then. On a Philco recorder, and I got my parents, I please buy me the AMT model of the Enterprise, which had lights in it, and I built it. And I don't know if, Buster, you're way too young, but anyone who is of a certain age and you built that damn model, the engines came off all the time. It wasn't well designed. So I remember mine had this mound of glue around the engines to try to keep the, what do you call them, nacelles? Yeah, to keep
Warp
everything.
nacelles.
Because it wasn't made out of steel. It was made out of cheap plastic. And then if you put the battery in and hook the lights up, it didn't just light up the top and the bottom the way it does in the show. The whole thing would glow. So it was a little cheap. I guess you were supposed to paint the inside, but when you're a little kid,
it's like, I don't want to invest this much.
Actually, you know what? I've got to redo my timeline. That was not 6th grade. That was more like 3rd grade.
Oh, yeah.
So I was really young when I got that model because I had to have it, so I could play Star Trek and break the engines off.
Okay, speaking of playing Star Trek, one of the things I did want to ask you is, what do you think your occupation would be were you a member of Starfleet?
Oh, I would have been a science officer.
Okay, but what do you think your specialization, like science specialization, would have been, or your focuses? I play a game called Star Trek Adventures, and it actually, like, for each player character, it gives you like 6 focuses.
You know what? That's good. I would not have been a medical officer because I'm.
That falls under That falls under
I
science.
can't. I just can't. And an engineer, I would be a terrible engineer. So I never
clearly from how badly you built that model.
I'd be a terrible security guy because I don't want to die. So I'd probably be a geologist or something, one of those guys that collects samples and analyzes. And because I don't think I would be, maybe like Chekhov and Sulu had cool jobs.
Navigation and
navigation and helmsman.
And Sulu technically also did tactical as well.
He did, and he was a great sword fighter.
The naked time. I made her watch that the other day. I made her. We were like skipping over a few because I'm like, I'm not watching me.
Yeah, I think that's third season, isn't it?
No, that is in the first season.
Is that the first season?
And
okay. What's the one where they suddenly get weapons because that mean spirit comes on board the ship and the Klingons are there, and that's got to be third season. And suddenly everybody has swords because Scotty gets one, and it's a Scottish sword. He goes, a claymore. And then everybody's losing their mind.
What weapon would have appeared in your hand?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe a broadsword. But I remember the thing I loved about it was everybody starts getting mad. And Scotty calls Spock a freak. He goes, "Get out of here, you half-breed freak!" And then Spock goes, "I have to say I did not enjoy my time with humans." He goes, "Then transfer out."
I love Scotty.
And then he calls the Klingons fuzz-face goons. "You fuzz-face goons! You should have left them in space."
Okay, you know me and like my love of Klingons.
Yeah. Well, and the Klingons back then were just Soviets. Yeah, and Christopher Lloyd as the evil Klingon.
He defined Klingons for literally 40 years.
He was great, and I have to say I loved his ending when Kirk kicked him in the face and says, "I have had enough of you," and then he kicks him into that volcano. But anyways, no, I always thought in the original that the Klingons are supposed to be Soviets.
Of course, yeah, overall, from a narration perspective, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and the Romulans
because it was a Cold War. It was a Cold War,
and the Romulans weren't really the Chinese, but they were.
They definitely, I don't know who exactly, but they were all, it was almost like 2 Cold Wars going on, with the Romulans. But, in the canon, the Romulans basically, after dealing with Kirk and the Enterprise and they didn't appear for another 100 years to the Federation and Starfleet. I mean, they probably heard some scuttlebutt on them once in a while, but they really, kept low after.
Oh, yeah. Well, in the first season, I got to say, that's probably one of the best episodes. I believe it's first season, Balance of Terror.
Yeah, and of course, Mark Leonard also, who played
Mark Leonard, who Spock's dad plays the commander of the.
I know. To a lot of you listening to this,
Romulan ship.
You know this. You know these things.
Yeah, and it's a submarine movie. That's what's so cool about that episode.
Yes,
it's a submarine movie, which is cool.
It's like 20,000
and it's about
leagues.
sound. Because remember when the guy trips and he makes a sound, and the Romulans hear it. And the Romulans were essentially Romans. I mean, they wore Roman helmets and they did Roman salutes.
And then later they had the Remans as well in the canon, who are the cousin, almost like another genetic cousin of the Romulans that are kept in the dark. I don't know. I apologize to those of you who know more than me. I am just sitting here having a good time with my friend Ron talking about Star Trek. I don't have to know everything. I don't have to be a pillar of canon. But
pillar of canon.
I'm a pillar. But the other thing too is we talked. So you believe you would be like a geologist collecting samples?
I'd be a science guy.
You'd be a science guy. Yeah. Okay.
With a blue shirt.
Now, you and I, before we did this, we talked how you kind of know you're more of an original series
and the movies
guy.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the movies a little bit here. Let's discuss the movies here. What movies Okay, first of all, favorite of, I imagine you mean the first 6 original series movies. Okay.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what is the best one from like the perspective of what you do for a living?
As a screenwriter, and
right,
I would definitely say 2,
Wrath of Khan.
2 and 4. Wrath of Khan is a real war movie. I mean, that is it's just an out and out war.
It's
film.
iconic. I mean,
and it's what. And the thing was, if you watch Star Trek on television or even in repeats, when you heard they were making Star Trek movies, that's what you want to see. You want to see a big budget battle in space, which they never could really do.
Right.
You know,
they didn't do it in the show. I mean, they kind of did and didn't in the show, depending on
it's hard and it's expensive, and especially with the technology they had back then. And whereas, and Star Trek 2, it delivered. And I think that's what all of us, when we were kids, Star Trek, the first one came out, and we were expecting this, not a science thing, you know, which is what it was. It was just like a science show.
Right.
You know, with Voyager gone bad. It was...
Voyager.
And it went on and on and on. Oh, my God, that thing. And it's like they did a Vulcan mind meld, 2001, and Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because there was all these heady ideas, where Star Trek 2 is very simple and direct.
And it calls back to an episode of the original
the original show.
The space
and then Spock dies. You know, Spock does everything he can to save the crew. And
it was everything the first movie wasn't.
Yeah, and it delivered. And you know, and I had a great score by James Horner. And it's just one of those movies that as a kid, when you see it, you never forget. Also the one 4 where they have to go back in time and save the whales.
Okay, now why that one? Because that is absolutely my favorite. 100%.
Because it you know, what was good about that one is they always say that period pieces don't work, whether it's science fiction or, you know, make a movie about the English Civil War or whatever, unless it has some relevance to today.
Right.
And that one made it very relevant about, in the 80s, that was a big deal, save the whales. That was a big thing in the 80s. Everybody was like, we got to save the whales. They're these majestic, beautiful animals. And at the time,
they are.
I think it was Russia, Norway, and Japan were still hunting them.
Right.
And Greenpeace and all these different organizations are trying to, you know, stop the Russians and the Japanese and the Norwegians from hunting whales, which does seem fairly archaic because we don't use whale oil anymore for lamps.
You know that too, whale, from what I understand, this is a little side fact, whale blubber was often used in cosmetics at the time.
That's right, in perfume.
Like, especially lipstick.
Yeah, I remember I used to hear that, and I thought, oh, God. But I always thought that the relevance of that and the idea of them going back in time to the 1980s in San Francisco, it's brilliant.
If you like that movie, you'll like season 2 of Picard.
Okay, because
there's a lot of homages to
I
that.
was blown away by that film when I saw it. And
I personally, I love Star Trek 4 because, you know, and for me, that doesn't connect as much because I was born in 88. So.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. It had already come and gone at that. No. When did that come out?
I think it was
86?
84, 85, I believe.
Okay.
I'll look it up later.
Yeah, I thought 84 would have been Star Trek 4. No, Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock was 84. Because I had a poster of it. And the one sheets you can see the date. It's scribbled at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's in the little code. It's at the bottom of old one sheets.
The whale, like, there was, you know, some. When I was growing up, there was a lot of the conservation, like, you know, the kid shows I watched.
Yeah.
Like, I always remember to this day on Captain Planet when they tell you, like, not to run your water while you're brushing your teeth because it just wastes water.
Yeah,
and for the rest of my life, every time I brush my teeth, I think Captain Planet.
Yeah, see, I didn't see Captain Planet, so I still do it.
He's our hero.
Because we grew up with this awful show called The Lost Saucer with Jim Nabors and Ruth Buzzy, and they just ran the water the whole time when they brushed their teeth.
But so the whale thing connected to me at the age that I saw. I think I was like 16 or so. In fact, Fun side story. I just went and saw a bunch of my family in southern Missouri, and I stayed with my aunt, who that was the house I first watched all the Star Trek movies.
Oh
at.
wow! So
And
you
she
didn't
gave
see him.
me-
You didn't see him on screen.
No.
You saw him on video.
No, and
That's a different
like I went.
experience.
She let me go through her VHS tapes from her late husband's, my uncle Bobby. She let me go through his VHS tapes, and I couldn't find all. I could only find but one of them, and it was my favorite, Star Trek 4.
Okay.
So I have that actually at home, and I'm gonna do something with it. I'm gonna put it in a shadow box or something because it's a sacred tape to me. But anyway, the thing is though, is so like that hit with me as a kid, and I remember the time that I watched all those movies. I was in the middle when I was watching all those movies. Katrina was happening.
Oh, in 2005?
Yes, the first time I watched all the Star Trek movies, Katrina was happening at the same time.
Wow.
So that's kind of where I was when I saw that movie.
You binge watched all the Star Trek movies.
Yeah. Yes, in like 3 nights.
Wow.
But the thing is...
Yeah, that's commitment.
The thing is, too, is that what I'm trying to get to is the thing that hit the most with me with Star Trek 4 is the humor. Because that movie split some of the characters up in different directions, like the episodes did.
Yeah, they all had a different mission.
And it was comedic. It was the first one that was truly a comedy. And there were wonderful episodes of Star Trek that were almost purely comedy.
So, did you like it when he did the Spock pinch on the punk rock guy on the bus?
Yes. See, this is why you need to watch Picard season 2. You need to watch it.
I think everybody needs a Spock pinch.
You gotta watch Picard.
You know, you got to have one of those ready to go.
I got it.
Or the goon on the bus.
I really loved. My favorite line from that whole movie is when Spock and Kirk are in the car with the whale lady.
Yeah, the whale lady.
I forget her name. and she. And they pull her, they're going to drop Spock off, and her and Kirk are going to go to dinner. And she says, or what is it? He just goes off into the park. And then she kind of looks at Kirk and says something along the lines of, is he going to, like, what? He's just going to go off into a park? I can't remember the line she says. But Kirk looks at her and says, yeah, he had a little too much LDS back in the 60s. And she just... and LDS. I did not get that line wrong. He did not say LSD.
No,
he said LDS.
Church of Latter-day Saints.
And she just kind of is like, you guys are weirdos. That is my favorite line.
Well, and
Double Dumbass on You. I mean, that's a classic.
Now, I got to say, when it comes to the movies, and I admire him for this, is I really admire that J.J. Abrams, when he did the new stuff with Zachary Quinto as Spock and
Chris Pine.
Chris Pine as Kirk.
Zoe, I forget how to say her last name.
Saldana.
Yes.
As Uhura, and of course the great, God, what's the guy that did McCoy? He's perfect.
Oh,
He's
man.
perfect.
Oh, Carl Urban?
Carl Urban, yeah.
Oh,
He's perfect.
Oh,
Okay.
my God. Okay, so McCoy is absolutely my favorite. And when I saw him, because back in the day, before they made that movie, they'd always talked about making new Star Trek movies and resetting them. Mm-hmm. And I always thought before then that the best choice would have been Gary Sinise.
Oh gosh, yeah, but I mean, he sort of aged out of the role.
Right. But my thought was if they were ever going to like reset the original series in some way, whether it was a new show or anything, and they were going to try to match the age of everybody, Gary Sinise to me looks so much like DeForest Kelley, especially the They both have bags under their eyes.
Yeah, big bags.
And I think Gary Sinise would have just nailed that role. I would still, to this day, I would love to see Gary Sinise still play like an older McCoy.
Play an old McCoy, an old country doctor.
Oh God! But anyway, Carl Urban. I mean, he's like super
Yeah, no,
handsome.
he's good in Pathfinder
so
too.
Handsome.
Hey, and I had this kind of tragic connection, sadly, because I was very impressed with the casting. You know, Simon Pegg as Scotty and Anton Yelchin as Chekhov, and I knew Anton Yelchin when he was a little kid because I went to film school at USC with his dad. His uncle Eugene Yelchin's. His brother, Victor, came over from Russia in 1989 with little Anton. Mm-hmm. And I knew that little guy. And we used to go out and we'd see his brother, Victor, and with his wife, Irina. And Anton was this great little kid. And I remember when he was about 15 or 16, we went to a birthday party, and he and I got in a big discussion about the Beatles. And he had already acted in a couple of things. And
Right,
he said, yeah, I want to be an actor, and I really want to do this because his parents were ice skating champions, and they did ice dancers in Russia, or back then Soviet Union. And I thought he was an incredible Chekhov. And then when that happened to him in 2016, I was beyond shocked because it was just such a freak thing.
It's and it's such a shame that not one person or anybody drove by or anything.
Yeah, I mean the idea of being run over by your own car that just flew into drive.
It's horrible.
Yeah, it's one of the
and obviously always condolences to him and his family.
Oh, they're wonderful people too.
Such a loss of such a promising young person. I guarantee if he was still alive right now, he'd be getting parts.
Oh my gosh, he was great in Alpha Dog.
He was so talented. And, and I mean, you knew that from you knew.
He
him
was
from
really
a young age.
he was unbelievably smart, and you could tell he had that, as they say in Apocalypse Now, that weird light around him that made him unlike everybody else. But I just what I liked about what J.J. Abrams did was he respected the show and the fan base, because I was on the Dark Shadows movie for about a minute as a writer, and I was dismayed at what I felt was the total disregard,
like a bastardization.
Well, I mean, Tim Burton, the director, David Kennedy was one of the producers, and he had the rights because he had worked with Dan Curtis in the past, and he said, I think we should be reverent to the fan base. Because the fan base is everything. I said, yeah, the direction to go with this is what J.J. Abrams did with Star Trek, because he was very reverential towards the original show, the original characters, the fan base. And with Dark Shadows, Tim Burton's idea was, it's just a stupid 60s show. Let's make fun of it.
And Tim Burton, off to the side here, I know we're talking about Star Trek, but Tim Burton kind of has a history of that sort of behavior. Not that I'm knocking it, but with Batman, with 1989 Batman, which is a great movie. Don't get me wrong. I watched Batman 89, like it was like water to my little 5-year-old self. I drank it up. I love that movie. I watched it every time we visited my aunts. I used to remember the little WB, like Sylvester Stallone, Sylvester the Cat, and Bugs Bunny at the beginning of it on the little WB logo. But anyway, the thing that gets me with him in particular with that Batman movie is, from what I understand, again, in the comments, let us know if I'm wrong. From what I understand, he did not want to use any comic, he didn't do really any comic book research of any kind. There was no desire on his part to look at the comics and to go from that. He kind of, I believe, sort of made those movies with the 60s show in mind, but with obviously without the Adam West style of Batman, which Michael Keaton will always be one of the the Batmans in my heart, the Batmen in my heart, as well as Adam West. And I guess, Marla always points this out to me when we talk about this subject, and you would probably agree with her on this, that she used to say it was such a shock back then that Michael Keaton was cast as Batman.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
Because he was more of a comedic
He was a comedian.
actor.
He was a light comedian.
Yeah,
he was Mr. Mom.
Right.
And he was Beetlejuice, and before that he was
and at that time in Batman's canon, Batman was because Frank Miller and I don't know if Moore had written much yet, but he had become a darker character in the 80s.
And by the way, what Tim Burton did, those Batmans, I have to, and we're way off Star Trek here,
I know, but it's all related.
But I'm not a fan of those films because even at the time I felt disappointed. And because I liked the comic book Batman, I liked The Dark Knight. I liked And when Christopher Nolan did Batman Begins, I had very low hopes. I thought, or low expectations. I thought, here they go again. They're going to ruin it. That movie with that score, with Christian Bale and Michael Caine, was so good.
Fantastic.
And then the next one, Dark Knight, so good. It's very, very hard now because they've set such a high bar
for Batman.
For Batman, and
I'm on team. Batman needs to be fun again. We need to have a new Adam West Batman style show.
Yeah, because he's a dark character. He's a dark character.
I think he could stand some fun. But and it's funny because one of the reasons I have a really like, for me, Star Trek and Batman have a really like, they are connected very, very well, I don't know how to say it, but they're very connected for me because I actually got into Star Trek because of Batman.
Okay. All
because
right. Well,
we're going to go into a little quick place. I got into Star Trek because I used to role play in a Batman group.
Okay.
When I was a teenager, like I was like 12.
So you were
I was getting on AOL. And
so you were like the Joker who then...
I was playing Batgirl. I was playing Barbara Gordon Batgirl in a group where it was like, it's like a role-playing game, but you have to type to each other because it's the early days of the internet. And it's like we'd roll dice. It was kind of like D&D. But we describe what our characters were doing in turns and things like that. And I played Batgirl in a group. And one of the rules of the group was you could play any DC character, like any character that's been published in a DC comic, you can play them. And they don't have to be a Batman character, right? And one of the players was playing this guy named Dr. McCoy, and I had no idea who that was. And so I messaged him. I said, I'm not trying to be rude, but who is Dr. McCoy in relation to DC Comics? And then he told me about this thing called Star Trek.
And then McCoy.
Then my first episode was Spock's brain.
Oh my gosh.
Can you believe that I still watched?
That, that's not a good introduction.
No, but to be honest, I still to this day love Spock's brain because it is a terrible episode, but it was my first episode.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
I will always
if it's your first, you remember it as cool. And because
fun story, everybody.
Because Spock's brain is, and all the fan literature, and they always remember that as the worst one. Some of those, I think the third season is unfairly maligned. 2 years ago, I got the flu. I contracted the flu, and it was during COVID, but it was a flu. Mm-hmm. And I had the DVDs of the third season, but remastered,
right.
with the new effects, and,
right.
Planets that look cool. And I said, I'm going to watch the whole damn thing. I'm going to watch the third season, and I'm going to learn to love it. And you know what? I learned to love it.
Yeah.
It's not bad. The Savage Curtain is awesome. Okay, the one with Abraham Lincoln. Okay.
Oh my God. Okay, I just want to say a shout out to somebody the other day that was making jokes about. I play a Star Trek Adventures campaign. I'm actually the DM of it. We'll just shout that out. It's Star Trek Solace. I'm also a member of another game called Star Trek Vasquez.
Okay.
We named it after the Vasquez Rock.
After the Vasquez Rock and the Gorn.
But one of our members, Jared Huckabee, the other day was talking. I had an episode where they basically found Paul Bunyan in space.
Okay.
Aboard the Wabash Cannonball. Yes, Babe was on the quick synopsis. They find like this temporal flux, and it's caused by a train in space, which was the Wabash Cannonball from Legend that Cal Bunyan was the conductor of and launched into space because he got it going.
And then Paul Bunyan was in space.
Paul Bunyan's on the ship.
Big Blue Ox Babe.
Jared kept, like, as soon as he realized, like, Paul Bunyan's on the ship, or somebody big was on the ship because the daughter of Paul Bunyan greeted them first. And he's like, Abe Lincoln, his character's, like, referencing, like, the Abe Lincoln in Enterprise.
From the Savage Curtain.
Giant Abe Lincoln. See?
Yeah, because there's a friend of mine and I, we refer to that episode all the time. We talk about Kalis, the unforgettable. The Klingon that set the... I'm sorry. That set the pattern of tyranny, the future pattern of tyranny on his planet. Okay, we did that. We keep bringing up, because the Excalbian is this lava monster.
Yeah.
But it has these claws, and they go click, click.
Click, click.
So he's always clicking. Like at the end of a sentence, he'll go click, click. So occasionally this friend of mine and I, when we conclude our communication, we'll write click, click. Which is the dorkiest Star Trek thing you can do.
Hey, I'm pretty sure somebody out there has something dorkier to tell us about. Please leave us your dorkiest Star Trek in jokes with your friends in the comments. Click, click. So I think we need to start wrapping this up. But just before we go, let's just take a couple minutes to talk about sort of like you're a production guy. Obviously, you're a writer, you're a director, you do all kinds of stuff. In fact, Ron's directed me before. In
Yeah,
a
I
commercial.
did. I directed you in a commercial.
But my question to you, from that perspective, let's say somebody somebody from Paramount or whatever said right now, hey, we want you to head up a Star Trek project, whether it's a movie, it's a TV show, it's all up to you. Let's say you were given just free reign to do a Star Trek project. What do you think?
I would get all of the J.J. Abrams actors and either make a sequel to or redo Doomsday Machine, but as a film with modern day technology, or if it's a sequel, there was a second planet killer, and they have to stop it. I think that would be spectacular as a movie. And Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, everybody. Obviously, we'd have to, sadly, recast Chekhov.
I don't know. They always had like people, that weren't Chekhov before Chekhov doing that.
That's true.
So you could just make a new character, to be honest, or use a character that's already in canon.
Yeah, because it would seem sacrilegious.
From like the animated series or something. There's plenty of characters out there that would fill that position.
Yeah, to be respectful. That's what I would do. I would say, let's do Doomsday Machine. I've always thought about it too, and it was the first thing I saw, and I still have
it's the first thing we talked about today, so
yeah,
it's kind of a nice roundabout.
And anyone who what William Wyndham did with Decker, Commodore Decker, Matt Decker, it's amazing, and it's a great part for any actor, and that's what I would do. But now Star Trek's so big, as you call it, the canon of Star. It's like Shakespeare, the canon of Shakespeare. It's so big now that I don't know if something like that would fit into it,
right.
or not. If you think about it, the latest films, they don't really fit in. They've gone on their own course.
They're on their own timeline too, the Kelvin timeline.
Yeah, they've gone on their own. So maybe, I don't know.
You can do whatever you want.
But if Paramount said, "Hey, Reinhard Denke, we want you to write and direct a Star Trek movie," which would never happen, but if it did, I would say, let's just redo the Doomsday Machine and let's go to the old Norman Spinelli script and let's extend it and make it 2 hours, and
fill it in.
I can do that, and we'll add in.
You just have to add like B-plot stuff.
Well, really. I would add in what happened to the Constellation. We never saw that. That was before the show started.
Oh, that's
really that's what you start with, and then just draw out the 1 hour thing into 120 minutes, and hopefully someone would pay to come see it. You never know nowadays with streamers.
I would pay to see it. So you have at least one person.
Okay, well that's something that'll defray the cost.
All right. Well, I think we're going to conclude this. Ron, do you have any projects going on that you'd like to plug or you'd like to mention? Anything happening?
Yeah, this thing I'm doing with you guys about the murder of 1976 Cullen Davis, oil tycoon. He murdered a little girl and some people in Fort Worth, and got away with it. That's called Sex, Greed, Money, Murder, and Chicken Fried Steak. I certainly want to promote that, and a TV show I'm working on right now called Strange as It Seems. Great show about a guy who was a quadriplegic in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and he had an incredible life and very rich life. His handicap never got in his way. And it's an inspiration because he started the first big music company in L.A. that was doing licensed music.
Oh, wow.
It's called General Music. And you can see some of the shows he did. He did the music to Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Oh.
He did the music to, remember those old shows like Tarzan and Flipper, Gentle Ben?
Oh, my God, I remember Flipper. I loved Flipper.
He did all that. He did Woody Woodpecker. And he didn't let the fact that he was basically just ahead get in his way. And one more show called Currency. It's about a future financial meltdown in a showdown between the United States and China. So that's me pushing my promoting myself.
I'm always going to ask people that come on here to plug any projects they want some eyes on or some ears on. But,
thank you.
Well, again, my name is Buster the Destroyer. I'm your host. You can always find me on twitch.tv/Buster the Destroyer doing Star Citizen streams and the occasional Star Trek Adventures campaign session. And then Ron, you can find him. Well, we're in the middle of changing the name of a company, so
Yeah, there's that.
So we got some stuff going on, but if you're ever curious about what Ron's up to, just ask me on my stream or something.
Oh yeah, you'll be getting daily updates.
Get some updates. So I talk to you at least once a week most of the time. So well, thank you again, and thank you to
Thank you, Buster.
Yeah, and thank you to our sponsors. And thank you to everybody that came to listen. I hope this was a good first episode. And if you didn't think so, please let me know. Give me notes.
And
maybe
thank you,
I'll
Sam.
improve it. Yeah, thanks to Sam, who is sitting here silently having to listen to us drone on about Star Trek.
And Batman.
Against his will. And Batman. I mean, Batman's important. But anyway, thank y'all so much. Y'all have a great day. And we'll see you next time on the Holodeck.